for a shleima, for anything for people?
Just please God, all the Jews in South Africa remain safe.
Amen.
And obviously in the world, in Ukraine and Israel. Yeah.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, so a new chapter, which is entitled the title is The Importance of Little Things. So Rabbi Zinvert Zitzel, among the most brilliant and distinguished scholars of Yerushalayim, once gave a lecture deeply etched in my memory. He opened with an incisive question. Our generation is blessed with many people dedicating their lives to Torah study. If so, why have we not merited producing a concomitant quantity and quality of great Torah sages and leaders as in previous generations? His answer was based on the wisdom of the Chafetz Chaim. The Yetzer Hara is very clever and always challenges a person in his weak spots. Some people tend to concentrate on grand achievements and overarching issues. They may be very generous and be involved in big philanthropic projects. The evil inclination knows that their strengths and therefore he tempts and provokes them with small and trivial matters. Thus, one can find a magnanimous donor who ignores the pleas of one's knocking at his door, or caustically responds when his neighbor asks for a favor. In contrast, many people are very good at responding to small requests made of them on a daily basis. They have no problem giving a destitute man a few dollars or loaning a wrench to a neighbor. However, when a larger community effort and undertaking is required, the Yetzer Hara advises them to refrain from getting involved, as this is just too much for them. Great sages and Torah leaders of each generation are those individuals who deny the Yetzer Hara in any space and stand before him like a fortress wall, whether in the small or great things. Okay, that was just the intro. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good. All right. So we're going on to the Gemara now. And we basically ended off with obviously how humiliation is worked out, that the differences between an eminent person compared to somebody that's lower up on the social hierarchy. And there was an issue with regards to Rav Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon sharing a similar view. We also said, though, that in a certain case, we've know that with regards to Rav Yehuda, he's the most lenient to the assailant, because he said that at the end of the day, rich people are not judged as rich people because there's no end to what they can ask from the assailant. You know, their reputation has been sullied, etc. So we said we view a rich person as if they were previously super wealthy and now they're middle class. So, you know, they get what's reasonable, but nothing over the top. And a poor person, they'll get amongst the lowest of the poor, meaning that they won't get a lot for humiliation. So in Rabbi Yehuda's view, he makes sure that the assailant doesn't overpay for humiliation. And then Rabbi Shimon was a little bit more stringent. He said that somebody that was eminent in terms of social standing gets a high sum, and somebody that's poor also gets paid, but obviously less so than somebody whose social status affects their wealth. Now, Gavin asked an excellent question last time, because in today's day and age, we all seem to gravitate more towards Rabbi Meir, who said that rich and poor alike were all the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Gavin says, well, why is it fair that a rich person gets paid more for humiliation than a poor person? And the reality is it's about damage control. If a poor person begs at robots and somebody says to him, go get a job, you know, stop being a bum, believe me, in Shemaim, they're going to rack that oak over the coals. Make no mistake. But when that person drives off, he hasn't affected the person's earning potential other than not giving him. he did affect his self-esteem. Whereas in terms of, we use this example of in Finland, the prime minister that was caught partying, that she sullied her reputation because she was caught as a party animal instead of with the decorum that she usually holds herself in, and therefore that's affected her standing in political circles. So when it is a career affecter, you're paying for financial compensation, Gav. But it was a good question. It's not emotionally how we judge them. But please know that Gavin's question was so good that in Shemaim, they're going to judge quite harshly, especially maybe it might be judged the other way around. Maybe somebody that's full of himself needs to be humbled every now and again, and that person that's embarrassed and is poverty-stricken and doesn't need that other embarrassment where it could wreck him emotionally, that individual that has done such a thing might be far more responsible in Shemaim, especially if it affects his self-esteem and where he doesn't want to even try anymore. So we're talking about the financial effect in this world compared to spiritual ramifications in the next world. They're two different things. Anyway, we basically know that our Mishnah accords with Rabbi Shimon because not only is the humiliation factor higher with a wealthier person compared to a poor person, but Rabbi Yehuda differentiated himself because he said one who humiliates a blind man or is humiliated by a blind man, there's no liability. And that separates him from the Mishnah who says one who humiliates a blind man is liable. And what actually ended up happening was there was a suggestion that in fact when a blind man humiliates somebody, he's not liable because certain opinions say that he's not halachically seen in the same light as other people in terms of responsibility. But when he is humiliated, obviously there's compensation given to him. But that's obviously where Rav Yehuda differs from the Mishnah. So then it's saying that the Mishnah has to then, based on those grounds, go more with the view of Rabbi Shimon. Because the Mishnah states one humiliates a sleeping person is liable, but a sleeping person who humiliated another person is not liable. I used the example last time, if you're sleepwalking and you pull down your pants and you take a piss on somebody else, you're not exactly responsible. You might wake up really quickly when they give you a crack, but apart from that, you're not in no state to know what you're doing. So they're saying sometimes if a blind person embarrasses somebody, they might not know what they're doing and therefore they're not liable. So that's the one opinion. And then it fixes itself up and says, look, that's not all opinions. It says that a blind person collects if he's humiliated, and he pays if he humiliates somebody else. So that cannot be the view of Rabbi Yehuda, according to the Mishnah. And Rabbi Shimon would concur with that, meaning a blind person is as responsible as somebody else. If he makes somebody else embarrassed, he has to pay. If he is embarrassed, he must pay too. He must be paid too. So either way, he's like a average individual, whereas the other opinion, according to Rav Yehuda, is not. Okay, so now that we're on the subject of humiliation, the Brisa wants to know who stated the ruling that the rabbis taught in the following Brisa. If one intended to humiliate a small person and he humiliated a big person instead, he gives the big person the value of the humiliation for the small person. So, I mean, obviously then, guys, the question is, what is a big person and what is a small person? What is your opinions? We'll clarify it later. What do you guys think?
A big person. Sorry, Gavin, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
A big person maybe means a person who's he might be wealthy or might be well known in the community, big in terms of stature.
Exactly.
Maybe.
Exactly. So on first initial look, it is a big person as somebody that's well respected, has notoriety, has a lot of influence in the community, and a small person is seen as somebody that doesn't seem to affect the social scale that much. Somebody that's on the poor end of the scale, unfortunately. Now, we're not talking, Gavin, about somebody that's big in terms of mitzvahs or learning, etc. This is just talking about social eminence, it would appear. So the Mishnah states that one is not liable for humiliation unless his action was deliberate. So this is the concept that we're discussing. So consequently, if a person is liable only for the amount of humiliation that results from his intended act, it means that if he actually intended to humiliate a small person and he humiliated a big person, he only pays the equivalent of a small person. What do we mean? Is that the fee for humiliating somebody that is poor, because it's not going to cost the poor person a lot in terms of reputation, is small. And therefore, if he misunderstands the person and he thinks he's a nobody, and he let me give you a primary example. Do you remember the guy that did 4 years for throwing a shoe at, what was it, at George Bush?
Yeah.
Yeah, that has got to be a really stupid decision. I mean, it's a big waste of 4 years. I mean, it's hectic. So anyway, he threw a shoe at the President of the United States and he got 4 years in prison. Okay? Now, if you throw a shoe at the President of the United States and he's not on the he's not in the White House with the eagle and on a podium and everything else, and you see him at the shops, and he's just some oak that's irritating you, and you throw a liquid fruit at him, you're not going to do 4 years. That's what it's saying, because you don't know he's the President of the United States. He was shopping in his personal capacity. But if he's holding an official rank and title, and you embarrass him when you know full well who he is, then you pay the full fee. So what it's saying is, if you take a person of eminence, you mistake them for a poor person, and you humiliate them, all you owe them is the fee of what it would have cost a poor person in terms of reputation or revenue. That's all. Because intent in humiliation is everything. That's actually what it's trying to say. So it says, if one intended to humiliate a small person and he humiliated a big person instead, he gives the big person the value of the humiliation of the small person. Okay, if he intended to humiliate a Canaanite slave and he humiliated a Jewish free man instead, he gives the free man the value of the humiliation of a slave. So since the assailant intended to embarrass a slave who suffers less humiliation than does a free man, he pays only a lesser amount. He mistook his identity. So now, who is it that authored this brisa? Ostensibly, it's not Rabbi Meir, and it's not Rabbi Yehuda, and it's not Rabbi Shimon. Can anybody tell me why you don't think it's Rabbi Meir?
Maybe he has a more lenient view.
Not really. Arth, take a guess. We've done
No idea. I can't. I'm exhausted, man.
So what is okay? So answer me this question: what does Rabbi Meir hold?
I'm blank. I'm telling you.
Okay. Gavin, what does Rabbi Meir hold?
I'm in the same boat as Arthur. Today I can't help you.
In terms of punishment for against someone of high standing in the community for what Rabbi Meir's opinion is.
Let me rephrase it. We're all on the same boat. We're on the Titanic. So let me put it to you like this. If I say that I intended to humiliate a small person or a slave or somebody like that, and I actually humiliated a person of prominence, and because my intent to humiliate was somebody of lesser stature, which it would only incur me a lesser fee because your intent is what you pay. In other words, if you don't intend to embarrass somebody, you don't pay for embarrassment. That's a fact. It was no intention. If you don't intend to hurt somebody, you still pay for pain, medical bills, shevet, recovery and recuperation, and sar, the actual damage, but not for humiliation. Okay, you only intend to pay. And what it's saying is, if you intended to cause less humiliation, in that case, let me just turn off my phone. I'm sorry, guys. That's what's so nice. That's what's so nice about learning with friends. You can be yourself. As you can see, I'm in the dark. So what we're saying is, if your intent is to not humiliate at all, you don't pay for humiliation. If your intent is to humiliate a lesser person, you pay the less amount, even for a more prominent person. That's not the view of Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir says that we are children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and therefore there's no difference between a rich and a poor person. So if you caught embarrassing a rich person and you told them that you thought he was a poor person, it makes no difference. The Rabbi Meir says you embarrass somebody, you pay. Doesn't matter they're rich or poor. It's a view that we all like at the moment in modern times. Whereas Rav Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon says that the rich person is paid according to the imminence, and the poor person is paid according to their lower level of stature. It doesn't matter what your intention is. So this particular Mishnah doesn't fall within their particular opinion either. So the Gemara says, listen, you would assume that the Brasa states in the first ruling, small means small in possessions, exactly as Kevin says, poor. And when it says big, it means big in possessions. In other words, wealthy, exactly as Kevin said. So it says, accordingly, if you say that the Brisa follows Rabbi Meir, how can that be? Because he said all of the victims, rich and poor, are assessed together. The Brisa, on the other hand, expressly differentiates between two groups. And if you say that the Brisa follows Rabbi Yehuda, he said in the Mishnah, Canaanite slaves has no compensation for humiliation. So that's interesting. Whereas other views say that a Canaanite slave does get a fee for humiliation, but less so than a free person. Okay, so the Brisa seems to indicate that there's at least a minimal amount for humiliation of a slave, whereas Rav Yehuda says no. And if you want to say, guys, that the Brisa follows Rabbi Shimon, he said in essence that if one intended to humiliate this person and he inadvertently humiliated this other person, he's not liable at all. Okay, in other words, our Brisa merely limits the payment for humiliation to the amount appropriate for the intended victim. But according to Rabbi Shimon, the assailant would not be liable at all when he humiliated somebody other than his intended victim. Now, Gavin, you should recognize where this is from. You should definitely recognize it. Where's it from?
Sanhedrin.
Excellent. Do you
I was
have
going
any
to say
idea where?
Sanhedrin, because you guys have learnt it.
It's in the 79th daf. Okay.
I was a couple of hundred off, but that's fine.
So what we're saying is that look, if you have a look, if you remember, I'll just put it to you like that. The Torah treats humiliation exactly like murder. So just as one is not liable for murder unless he intended to kill the person he actually killed. Because it's written, if there will be a man who hates his fellow and ambushes him and rises up against him and strikes him mortally and he dies. Now there's a superfluous word, right? Because why do you have to say that he ambushes him? Because you don't need to say that. You could just say, listen, a man hates his fellow. He rises up against him and strikes him mortally and he dies. What do you mean he ambushes him? What does that mean exactly? So because it's superfluous, there's two different rulings. The rabbis learn in Sanhedrin 79a that ambush is teaching something different. It means like when say somebody picks up a rock, okay, and there's Kuthians, Gavin, and there's a Jew, and 9/10 of the people are Kuthians and one's a Jew. He throws a rock. In that particular case, his probability is that he wanted to kill a Kuthian or at least injure one. If he strikes a Jew, the laws are in his favor that that's not who he intended to strike. So that's how the rabbis see it. Okay, Rabbi Shimon works on it a different way. if he killed the wrong victim and intended somebody else, the guy's off the hook totally. So he uses it in a different way. Does that make does that make sense? So
Shouldn't be off the hook completely. I mean, it's a hell of a dangerous thing to do, to throw a rock into a crowd. Even if you hit the wrong person, you shouldn't get off at all.
okay, but it doesn't work like that, because in Sanhedrin, they're saying, yes, he was negligent, but you don't get the death penalty for the Kuthian side of things. Do you know what I'm saying? So in that particular case, you can think of it like the Kuthians were like the Taliban or something like that. Nobody's going to miss them.
Yeah.
So, 1 out of 10, it's still not, it can't be seen. He goes to the city of refuge, Gavin, for a negligent murder. Are you with me? But he doesn't get the death penalty. He never got warning. He never got Hasra. There are a myriad of factors. But in other words, Rabbi Shimon holds that basically, if you killed somebody else other than you intended to kill, you off the hook. How do they prove it? Because how do you prove intent? Maybe he wrote a letter and he said, I intend to kill such and such because he robbed me of my financial wealth. He's going to die soon. I'm just giving you a thing. He posts a letter on Facebook, and a guy that's standing next to him, he kills him instead because he lent him his raincoat and he looked like the guy, whatever. So anyway, that's Rabbi Shimon. So then obviously Rabbi Shimon is turning around and saying, look, if you intended not to embarrass the victim, it doesn't matter if it was a poorer person. You never intended to humiliate that victim. So therefore, it won't go according to the Brisa. So therefore, it doesn't follow Rabbi Shimon. It doesn't follow Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda is saying that at the end of the day, we don't see that for a slave that is entitled to any fee for humiliation at all. Whereas the Brisa said he is, just not as much as a rich person. And Rabbi Meir says everybody's equal, rich and poor. So what do you mean you intended to embarrass a poorer person? You're still not off the hook. So either way, it doesn't follow suit. But now we know why Rabbi Shimon doesn't follow suit, okay? And how does he get this, Rabbi Shimon? How does he get this fact that whether it's for murder or humiliation, it has to be the intended victim, otherwise you're off the hook? And he gets it from that pasuk that says in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 11, and she sends forth her hand and grasps his embarrassing place. And obviously it teaches that one is not liable for humiliation unless she intended to injure that specific victim that was assailing her husband. I mean, it wasn't an accident that she grabbed his privates. She wanted to render him to his knees in pain and humiliation for attacking her husband. So that was what you call focused intent. And that's where we derive humiliation from. Does that make sense, guys? That's exactly where it's derived from. And the verse with regards to the ambushing and the murder in Rabbi Shimon was Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 11. Okay. So the Gemara says, well, okay, so then who is the Tana that actually wrote this Brisa? And it says, actually, it's Rabbi Yehuda. So that's a bit of a confusion, because when Rabbi Yehuda said that slaves have no humiliation, that was to exempt a free man from giving them payment. In other words, what does it mean? It means Rabbi Yehuda derives from the pasuk that one is not liable for humiliating a Canaanite slave. But that doesn't mean that a slave cannot suffer humiliation. So it's not like he's disagreeing. He just personally wouldn't give any fee for humiliation to a Canaanite slave. We're not talking a Jewish slave. However, to assess how much humiliation a slave suffers, the Gemara says, we can assess them, and that amount will be given to this free man who was inadvertently humiliated. So, all right, so guys, we say, look, how much did the intended victim would agree to suffer that humiliation? And that's what we give to the free man. So I'll give you an example. Say I didn't realize that this person was a free man, and I thought he was a slave because he was dressed in disheveled clothing, whatever. And I pick up some eggs and I throw it at him. And this guy turns out to be a free man. And I said to him, but you're dressing like a slave. Why are you wearing this other coat? And he says, no, it's a Purim party. I'm dressing as a slave for a Purim party. I'm just using an example. So he said, well, he said, but I'm going to sue you for what you did. And he said, well, I thought you were a slave. So the only thing you can sue me for is what a slave would get in the humiliation. So the Bryce is saying that the Tana could be saying that you still owe for humiliation for a slave, but less. But then the Gemara is saying, look, but it can accord with Rabbi Yehuda, because although you don't pay a Canaanite slave, what you might say to the Canaanite slave is as follows: how much could I pay you to throw eggs on you that you would take eggs thrown on you? In other words, it's not part of your job description, but I want you to go to the county fair and I want you to be a clown. I want you to put on a clown outfit and the kids will throw eggs at you. And then I'll pay you for the day. I'll give you an extra bonus for you to take some eggs. And he said, all right, I want 200 Rand. The guy says, fine, I'll give you 200 Rand. Now, that money, although there's no entitlement to pay a Canaanite slave, there is an entitlement to pay this Jewish free person. So whatever the Canaanite slave would take in terms of a salary to be humiliated for the day or for that event, you would pay to a Jewish free man, but you wouldn't be entitled to pay it for a Canaanite slave. Why to a Jewish free man? Because that's who you humiliated, even though you thought he was a slave. And a Jewish free man is a person that's entitled to compensation. Does that make sense, guys? It's very straightforward. Nothing complicated. Fine. So we've got 10 minutes, and then we're going to, and if you wish, I can say, it can even accord with Rabbi Meir. So how on earth do you think it could accord with Rabbi Meir? Because Rabbi Meir says rich and poor alike are entitled to the same compensation for humiliation. And it's a very, very clever answer. It says, what I mean when I say a big person or small, a big, I'm saying, is an adult. A small means a minor, a child. So therefore, it's basically saying that a child wouldn't feel the same amount of humiliation as an adult. Obviously, because if an adult has got certain, what do you call it? Children, they might not get the intellectual gravity of the embarrassment. That's number one. Number two, they might not be mature enough to feel embarrassed and understand the social constraints compared to an adult. Does that make sense? So in that particular case, if you meant to insult a child, but you insulted an adult, you pay the fee of a child. So let me give you an example. A midget, you think it's a child, and then you realized you insulted him, and he's a midget with quite a few lawyers. You've got a problem. The only way to get out of it and say you're paying less is to say, well, you thought he was a child, and therefore you pay the embarrassment of a child, which is far less. Okay, because you mistook his physical, what do you call it? His physical maturity. Appearance, exactly.
Yeah.
His maturity level, exactly. But so the Gemara says, what do you mean? Is a minor capable of experiencing humiliation? Because a minor is mentally immature and has the legal status of a mentally deranged person. Now, before you get offended, what do we mean a mentally deranged person? Because he can act shamefully and not care, and he doesn't feel embarrassment when others humiliate him. In other words, he doesn't have the same sort of social inhibitions, okay?
I don't agree with that, Damon. So you're talking about a child, eh?
Yeah.
So let's take bullying, for instance. Bullying, these children are so humiliated. It's unbelievable.
I agree with you. What we're talking about here is a very specific case. Okay. So again, because this was bothering me too, is that I think children sometimes are more sensitive than adults, and bullying is a big deal. What we're saying is the effect in terms of their earning potential, social standing. These are compensation cases, Gavin. They're penalty and compensation cases. So if with an adult, you throw an egg at him. I don't mean bullying or intimidate or traumatically abuse him. I'm saying, but if an adult is at a podium giving a speech on finances, and you go and said you're nothing but a financially impoverished snake oil salesman. Don't believe what he said. He's a liar. Well, that's the end of his speech about collecting any money. But if you say to a child in front of other children in the playground, he's just a snake oil salesman, don't believe him, is a liar, it's not going to affect his financial ability, Gav. So we're talking merely
I agree.
compensation. But I thought that was an excellent point. But Rav Papa agrees with you, because he said there is a type of mana mature enough that they embarrass him and he becomes embarrassed. Also here we are dealing with a mana mature enough to feel the effects of embarrassment. In other words, we're talking about a mana that actually understands, although his understanding might not be as great as an adult. Rav Papa is saying, look, he might want to act childishly, but it's his choice. When somebody treats him badly like a child, he's embarrassed. But if he decides to be naughty or whatever, that's his choice. So in other words, there's a certain amount of immaturity and a certain amount of sensitivity and maturity. And we also have to look at the age of a child. If you insult a 5-year-old, he's not going to get it. If you insult somebody that's 15 or 16, like a 16-year-old daughter that's going through already gone through early adulthood and puberty or whatever, and you say, listen, you're really not a good-looking girl, going to create huge amount of humiliation and self-esteem issues. Whereas if you say to a 5-year-old, you look like an ugly duckling, she won't have the same level of embarrassment, because there's no self-esteem issues. It's not like she's dealing and interested in boys now. And so we're talking about different ages of sensitivity and maturity, according to Rav Papa. Exactly as Gavin said. So in other words, not all children are the same. That's what he's saying. That's exactly what Rav Papa is saying. You have a question, guys?
Because Damon, going back what you said a few minutes ago, you said the child, it's equivalent to a mentally deranged person. So the mentally that says a person that has no legal capacity.
Well, that's exactly the point. Is that what's the definition of a teenager? Somebody that can't see the consequences of actions. In other words, even though, so it's very interesting what Kevin's saying is that even though somebody can be mature on one level, when hormones are raging, they make stupid decisions. That's how come you've got teenage pregnancy or whatever. So on one hand, they can be quite sophisticated, and in other cases, still exploring their own emotional boundaries with others, etc. And they don't have capacity to see consequences. There's a certain legal age for drinking, there's a certain legal age for consensual sex, there's a certain age for voting. Because also what happens is with a lot of younger people, they start off quite liberal in their political views. And then when they realize there's a limitation in terms of money, it's nice to be able to give transgender and 1 million people operations for whatever they need. But at the end of the day, you've got to make triage choices and say, well, this person has oncology cases of cancer treatment. This other person has X amount of probability to live. There's a certain amount of funding available. We have to make hard choices. It might sound great paying for everybody's medical stuff. That's not the reality. So what happens is, as you get older, you would love to help everybody, but at the end of the day, you see that there are certain constraints, and that's about consequence of thought and actions, etc. Exactly as Kevin says. So we say that they're like a deranged person. That what is wisdom? Seeing the result of actions, being able to predict that if you put a certain cause in the world, you're going to get a certain effect. If you see an acorn and you throw it in the ground, it's going to become an oak tree. That's exactly it, Kevin. Arthur, you wanted to ask something?
No, I'm good.
All right, you're exhausted.
I want to say something. I agree with you. I've got teenage kids all the rain.
No,